Crucifixion in context. Crucifixion may be the most infamous of all types of punishment. The punishment that, according to Christian tradition, Jesus suffered at the hands of the Romans. Though mainly associated with the Romans, it was used as a punishment by several peoples, such as the Persians, the Carthaginians, Assyrians, and several others. Crucifixion has in fact been used in parts of the world as recently as the 21st century. Yet in this video I will focus upon the Roman practice of crucifixion and mention Islamic traditions briefly as well. In popular depictions of the crucifixion of Jesus, possibly because of a translation error of John 20:25, the wounds are described as being in his hands, and Jesus is usually on paintings shown with nails in his hands, but in Greek the word that is usually translated as hand could be used for the entire arm below the elbow. And normally in Roman tradition, the nails were actually inserted into the wrists of the victim. Also, though crosses and cross-shaped constructions were used, at times the device for crucifixion was just a wooden stake set up vertically, called in Latin crux simplex. A cross was not necessarily the form, but the device for crucifixion. And the device could also just be trees, as it was not unusual that people were simply nailed to trees in ancient Rome. Though many times the victim was alive in the Roman tradition when he was nailed, it wasn't always the case. Sometimes, in Roman law, the one to be executed was executed and killed before he was crucified. So you simply nailed his corpse to a stake or a tree as a post-death act. This practice of killing the victim of crucifixion before crucifying them is also the standard case in most interpretations of the Sharia within Islam, based in Islamic traditions such as the Quran 5:33 and the Hadiths. Most but not all scholars have traditionally seen the crucifixion to happen after execution through beheading. Though there are some exceptions, being the Maliki school tend to disagree and say that it is direct crucifixion, and there are some Hanafi scholars that say that there should be direct crucifixion as well. But the Shafi'i school and the Hanbali school seems to generally have a strong consensus that the crucifixion is after execution. So the majority view within Islam is and has been historically that crucifixion is something that is done after the execution. And this is also what has been done in modern cases of crucifixion in countries that claim to follow Islamic law. But now back to the Roman practice of direct crucifixion, where you were crucified alive. Being crucified alive did not always mean that you would die quickly due to blood loss. It was even rarely the case that you would die quickly. Survival within a short period of a couple of days following being crucified is possible, as in the case of those who chose each year among certain Christian sects to crucify themselves in order to get closer to Jesus and God as an act of faith, by exposing oneself to the same pain for at least a short period. And this practice shows just how survivable, at least for a little while, crucifixion was. As in ancient Roman times, you would not die quickly due to blood loss, but rather probably due to other causes, first together with the exhaustion coming from the lack of blood. You could die from several things. Asphyxiation, as the condemned would have severe difficulty breathing due to hyperexpansion of the chest muscles and lungs when you're hanging, nailed to a stake. You could also die of thirst due to not getting water after several days of pain. You could die due to blood poisoning or other sorts of infections coming from getting nailed by nails which were often dirty and or rusty. You could also be killed by passerbys as an act of mercy from them in certain cases, as sometimes by Roman law that was allowed to kill someone that was crucified as an act of mercy. Sometimes if you killed someone that was crucified, you were interrupting the punishment and thus could be liable to punishment yourself. It really depended upon the crime that the condemned had committed. Crucifixion meant a slow, painful, torturous death over several days beneath the open sky. It was also an humiliation by making the condemned victim as vulnerable as possible. Although art have traditionally depicted the figure of Jesus on a cross with a loincloth or a covering of the genitals, a person being crucified was usually stripped naked and thus exposed to the elements, which, depending upon the climate and the current seasons, could mean death by cold, through frostbite, or death by heat stroke under a burning sun. Both ways which are rather painful ways to die in. And again, not quick ways to die in either, but slow and painful, and completely terrifying to look at. Totally humiliating, which was the entire point, as crucifixion served as an instrument of fear, and as a reminder to people of the Roman power, the power of the Roman state, especially toward non-Roman subjects, and during mass crucifixions against rebelling peoples, which happened, for example, during the Third Servile War and after the siege of Jerusalem, where entire forests of crosses and stakes with people nailed to them were erected, where the screaming and moaning in agony could be heard several kilometers away, and so could the stench of death be smelled from the half-rotting corpses nailed to the stakes, creating a vomit-inducing miasma of rotten stench. A message to anyone that would stand against Rome, that this is the fate of those that go against Rome. These mass crucifixions of several thousands should be seen in the context of Rome's culture, where brutality was normal. This is a culture that had brutal mass slavery, gladiator games, where people were forced to fight to the death and regularly did what we would consider genocides and extermination wars due to offensive imperialistical reasons. As Tacitus states,
"Great empires are not maintained by timidity."
This is not to say that there wasn't criticism of the punishment, at least when it was utilized against other Romans. For example, the great orator Cicero said the following: "It is a crime to bind a Roman citizen, to scourge him is a wickedness, to put him to death is almost parricide. What shall I say of crucifying him? So guilty an action cannot by any possibility be adequately expressed by any name bad enough for it. Yet, with all this, that man was not content. Let him behold his country, said he. Let him die within sight of laws and liberty." And in the later Roman Empire, crucifixion for Roman citizens would become rather rare, as the practice was beginning to be seen more and more as being too extreme in brutality. And eventually we get Constantine the Great, the first Christian emperor, who abolished crucifixion in the Roman Empire in the year 337 out of veneration for its most famous victim, Jesus Christ. Thus would crucifixion as a punishment in Roman society end. Though again, crucifixion was still practiced outside of the Roman Empire in various places. And a lesser form of crucifixion, the one where you are executed before you are crucified, is still practiced to this very day in certain places. showing that practices that we sometimes consider as part of history are in fact still present. And I hope you liked this video, my viewers. Post comments and give questions, and I will try to answer as quickly as possible. Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities. اشترك بالقناة من فضلكم.